I guess like kind of reading it here in this context and seeing all the evidence to support it. I guess I've thought about it in isolation, but as I read through the introduction, it stood out even more. So what do y'all think about that and the start of the adage and all that other stuff? Hello? Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to process, exactly what I really want to say, because it was kind of heavy starting out, like the new Jim Crow. It's a lot of information she piled into it. Yeah, give me a second.
And I was gonna look it up. I'm looking it up now.
I mean, I thought that it started off relatively the same as the new Jim Crow too, like in terms of the statistics and the depressing statistics. Um, okay.
Hey, how y'all doing?
Doing well. How are you?
Better than amazing, better than most, and feeling better than that.
Okay. It's good to hear. All right, so I was looking for the origin of that actual quote because that was one of the things I put a question mark to. I didn't have my phone beside me at that time. But then in that same paragraph, it ends with the wealth gap is where historic injustice breeds present suffering. And I know that we've talked a lot over the weeks, even with the other books, about how finances greatly impact the ability to elevate. And I know that we have kind of gone back and forth on, I guess the ability to shift classes, but I think that this one right here is starting off by saying that this is done deliberately, and I think that that is emphasized. So what do you think about it whenever they talk about it is historic injustice breeds present suffering? Do you think there ever was a time in which, I guess, there was true motivation to close that gap? And if so, when did you see that?
From my perspective, it seems like right after slavery ended, during the beginning of Reconstruction, there were some attempts to do that, but they got squashed pretty quickly. But that seems to me like the only time. It's like right after. It seems like there was this period, maybe for a year, right after. But then, people. It said in that first chapter, it said something about, the people in the South quickly brought in the reins on that and, established the KKK and all of that and got, really serious about not letting that happen.
But I think it was still pie in the sky stuff from the get-go. I think they expected resistance from it, and as soon as it happened, they were just like, yeah, we knew this was going to happen, let's just let them revert back to what it was before. I don't think there was ever any real intention behind it.
And talking about intention, she goes into talking about how every single president has promoted the idea of the Black banking network and Black banks in general. But basically, she says that where it looks good to say, hey, we want to, promote Black economy, realistically, they always had ulterior motives. And I think like that hit hard with me because I started processing, I guess, how many things we take for granted that it is for good, like we give people benefit of the doubt, but how she pointed out basically what each president was looking to accomplish, almost as if they knew it wouldn't be successful.
Yeah, to me, it sounded like more lip service towards what they should say, and more of that attitude that's really interesting to me about the Black community or individual needing to work hard and pull himself up and not be looking for someone to do something for him, you know, to kind of set him up. And it's like, how do you do that when the system is, you know, working explicitly to keep you down? And then every time you make an effort, I don't want to jump ahead in the chapter, but every time you make an effort to acquire your own wealth and to save, that just gets thwarted, or there's just these new roadblocks, new laws, new rules. So it just, you know, it just seems like when Yashonda was saying pie in the sky, it's just kind of like something to say. I mean, I didn't know that every president had said that, but I don't know what their real intention was behind saying it.
Yeah, that's kind of why I brought up, because I had never heard that either. And I mean, you hear about, you know, these presidents have looked out, blah, 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 blah. But I think like it was just eye-opening for me, because I thought about that and how you could possibly promote something knowing good and well that it wasn't actually going to be effective. And then the ability of the other immigrant banking systems to prosper. Because I definitely, like I saw the thing talking about how Bank of America started as Bank of Italy.
Right.
Had no idea.
Neither did I at all.
And I Googled it, it's real.
No, I knew about that only because I am Italian and it started in San Francisco and there's a large Italian community, and they were not allowed to use, you know, the regular American banking system at first. So they started their own. And I knew all about that, the guy that started it and everything, but just from being in banking also, I've noticed, I know that he would be turning over in his grave right now over how he started it and what it's turned into. Because once it turned into Bank of America, it took on all the same roadblocks for just not even racially, but just for the average person. Like the whole, I don't know where I heard this, but like America is the only place that has like the credit score and stuff like that. Like They don't use that in other countries. I don't know how they do it, but it seems like in banking, especially, you can get into a position where you're stuck. You're trying to move up, but you need a loan to do it, and you can't get the loan because the loan is on the credit score. And once you're in a certain spot in there, you're stuck for a while. It's going to take, you have to really seriously know how to manipulate the system. And honestly, it is manipulating, because if you go on just trying to do it the way they tell you, it's going to take you 7 years to repair credit. You have to honestly manipulate the system in order to do it any faster. And it keeps people stuck for generations. And I just, like I was saying, I knew about that whole Italian Bank of Italy just because of, my heritage and stuff and being close to it. And they started, it was all kinds of things they had to start from that, along with different social clubs and things like that they would use that to bring people into the bank being of the same heritage, because they couldn't join the regular social clubs that were there. So they had to invent their own, which are still in existence today. And they use that to funnel people into the banking system. And it's just...
One thing I thought was interesting about that, though, was when they said that they left the ghetto first.
Right.
And it was only after they were accepted as white, not through segregating their money. So they're saying they were able to get government guaranteed mortgage loans, and Black people were excluded from that. Right. So there's that element of like the Italian community knowing, we are being segregated to some extent and we have to take care of ourselves. But the Black community eventually do that. They're like, no, you're not even going to do that.
Yeah, because at first I guess they weren't considered white. And then eventually at some point, I think white people realized we need to strengthen our numbers. So we need to start including the rest of these people. So they became white all of a sudden and started getting those advantages. And now they've forgotten where they came from.
Well, that's what.
Yeah, it goes on to say that that particular dilemma, you know, with them getting out of the ghetto, said that the dilemma with the Black banks is highlighted because when contrasted with the other ones, Italian, Jewish, German, Irish, and Asian, they faced discrimination and exclusion. However, the key difference was that none of them was systematically, uniformly, and legally segregated to this thing. And for the length of time, the Black community was.
Right.
Yes. One of the things that I pulled up, because so here's the thing, whenever I'm reading these books, I know that they are definitely going to be biased. And so I find myself Googling all of the facts just to kind of make sure that everything does actually add up. And one of the things that I came across in Googling about Bank of America's history was about the owner. And it says about him, it says it was founded, the Bank of Italy in San Francisco, set in a former saloon, which backs up what Frankie's talking about with like the social clubs. Gianni initially began the bank as a way to provide loans to immigrants, middle-class Americans, and farmers denied services by major financial institutions of the time period. So basically he created it to be in opposition to the man, to the big banks. But then whenever it goes on to basically whitewash the history, because there's no real easier way of putting it, it says that as deposits grew and word of mouth carried, the name was changed to Bank of America, which Gianni felt better expressed the mission of his bank. So it's like you found it to be against the principles of America because they are discriminatory and your people can't get loans and you're trying to help out the community. But as soon as you start making it, all of a sudden you are wanting to be part of America. So
Greed takes over. Greed takes over.
That's what I was going to get. What do you think causes that shift? Because I think that we see that across the board. Like they'll talk about, you know, when Black folks make it and they leave the hood, they're, you know, joining a different society. So I think that just kind of that mentality of when you make it, you become one of them. Like, can you make it and still be you and still maintain your culture and your standards?
I think it's hard because I think people are looking for that acceptance. And as soon as they get that acceptance, they want to distance themselves because they personally have it now. So they want to distance themselves from everyone who doesn't. They feel like they've made it. And I think greed is really, to be honest, I think greed in this country specifically, I think greed runs everything. And I think greed is what took, he knew that he could not take that bank to the next level with it being called the Bank of Italy. There was no way. There was no way. You've got to disassociate yourself from that heritage in order to go to that next level. It's greed based, I believe.
Kind of a catch-22 too, because, you know, if you can reach a certain level of success and you're trying to hang out in the same neighborhood, you might face jealousy or envy from people within that neighborhood. I mean, the example that comes to my mind first is Tupac. You know, you have all this success and you're still trying to be, you know, gangster thug life and be in the hood. And it's like, now you don't really fit anymore. So it's like, where do you go? You don't really fit in that environment with the Section 8 housing if you're making $1 million a year. That's, you know what I mean? So where do you go at that point? If there was more of a base of affluent Black communities or middle-class Black communities, then you could blend in there. But instead, your options are usually white communities. And then you start to slowly assimilate and kind of take on the values of those people that you're around.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think I realized how extreme that was till I moved to Alabama. I mean, whenever I was in Georgia, I worked at, you know, a school in Henry County, but we had a gated community that was 90% of color. So it's like, I think being in Atlanta, we have this false sense of idea that like Black people really are coming up a lot more. And then whenever you get out, you're like, oh, I forgot I was in Atlanta when I saw that. Because you can't go other places and go to happy hours where you walk in and it's all Black professionals like sitting around the table drinking and talking about work. Like there's nowhere else in the country that I've been that happens in, except maybe Chicago. think I did go to a couple in Chicago, but I feel like they were planned. Like you can literally on any given day after work go to Peter Street and walk into a bar, and it's all young Black professionals still, you know, dressed and talking about work. But in other cities, if it's not a orchestrated event, you can't find it.
That's a
What,
fact.
Shauna?
Hey, Alan.
How y'all doing?
Talking about page 7 for the introduction, the theory held that the invisible hand had set the price of Black credit, the value of Black homes, and the cost of Black labor. This book is a challenge to that premise, and it lays bare the fact that the hand that drives Black poverty is not a natural and invisible one, but rather the coercive hand of the state that has consistently excluded Blacks from its full participation in American capitalism. And this is what really made me, I think, hone in and say that it really did remind me of the new Jim Crow, because like she comes out the cage swinging that basically this is all government moderated, that, you know, they phrase it in a way and use the media and the propaganda to portray it as, you know, it's the fault of Black people that they're still in this situation, when it realistically, the government laws and guidelines are the ones that are actually setting the ceilings, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that speaks to everything right there. After reading that and even seeing where she was comparing when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed and saying that the Black community owned a total of 0.5% of total wealth in the US, and to see 100 number has barely moved, and we still only own about 1% of the wealth in the United States. It's like
that was the one thing, that was the most glaring thing that I got out of that first chapter.
Yeah.
How little progress was made in basically 200 years almost. It's like 0.5 to what? To now 1.5?
No, I think it was just one.
Just one.
Just one.
That is definitely a coordinated effort by far. That's not by happenstance. That's coordinated. That is well thought out. You know what I mean? This is no way that's possible unless it's in a coordinated effort at all levels. That was amazing to me.
Yeah.
We have come that, you know what I mean? All these images you see and all these things that portray a certain type of affluence or lack thereof, for us to only have that much of a percentage point of a gain, and even when we make progress, is things out there to thwart that. That's what really stuck in my head through that, from the introduction up and through the first chapter.
Well, I mean, it also says right before the 1% statistic that 60% of the Black population is unbanked or underbanked, while only 20% of the whites are in the same category. And I think that we see this true whenever we look at, you know, Black athletes who sign these multi-million-dollar contracts and they play for 5 or 6 years, but as soon as they get hurt or they're too old or they don't get drafted, you know, they're moving back to their hometown and buying a house next to mama because they've blown their money. They don't know what to do with it. They get the money and then turn around and push it right back out of the community. So I guess my question is, since we have lots of advocacy minds and on this call, like, what can we do to start shifting that mindset? Like, us as individuals, what can we do to shift that narrative?
Well, let me go ahead and be the first to answer this question. Number one, we can continue to do what we're doing now. We're all learning from one another because we all have different gifts and strengths, and we all are in different industries, and we have to find the common denominator between what we've all have learned and bring it together, because no matter what we're all doing, we all have to deal with money on a regular basis. And here's the thing. I don't know about you all, but none of my parents or my grandparents ever sat me down and taught me anything about finances. Everything that I've learned through books. I've learned by going to seminars and conferences and having conversations with millionaires themselves. So we have to be resourceful, number one, and we have to know where to look for the resources. Also, I would say that in addition to reading, whatever we've learned, passed down to our kids and our next generation. One of the things I'm gonna do with my nieces and nephews when they get older, and I'm gonna start doing with my cousins, is just start teaching them like finances and stuff and playing games like Monopoly with them and stuff like that. Because whether you all notice or not, this is something Dr. Claude Anderson said in his book, Black Labor, White Wealth, that a lot of what she has mentioned is that a lot of what this young lady mentioned so far, what y'all have said, because interestingly enough, as y'all was talking, Amazon just dropped my book off. So that's very coincidental and right on time. But Dr. Claude Anderson says in Black Labor, White Wealth is that Black America is literally in a real life monopoly game that we're neither winning, well, we're neither playing nor winning. And a lot of that does have to do with what she says, what she's mentioned so far. I haven't gotten a chance to read it. So for starters, that's what I say we can do. Anyone else wants to add to that or has a different approach?
No, I think you're right. It definitely needs to, people need to start talking to their kids and talking to them earlier. And even if it's not your kid, if it's your niece or nephew or godson or goddaughter, because I see it every day. Parents are not talking to their kids about, and a lot of it may come from maybe they don't even know themselves, because I know my parents never taught me anything about banking, but they didn't know. I just have to say they were ignorant to, having a father who was an immigrant. It's all different here in America. You know what I mean? He didn't know anything about how things work here, about how credit works. My mother either. And so I learned everything from getting into banking when I was about 18 years old. And I've been basically in that, field for pretty much my whole adult life. And so I learned from working there. I learned from trial and error. I learned from going bankrupt and coming back, and and I learned tricks of the trade. It's a lot of things people don't know. And it's got to be education. It's got to be teaching kids. And don't wait till they're 18. That's not when you teach them. Right. That's way too, you're behind the game already. You're behind the game. You've got to start teaching them when they're like 14. As soon as they can open a checking account and get a debit card, they need to start learning about how to use it, about how to save money, about credit, and how, a lot of people don't even realize that you need to, if you want your child to be successful, you need to start them off before they can even get a credit card. If you have good credit or even decent credit, you need to put them on your credit card as an authorized user. You don't have to give them a credit card, but they're going to piggyback off your credit so that by the time they're 18, they already have an established credit score. So they're already ahead of the game. And this is what a lot of white parents do that I don't see Black parents do. And that's just from my own observations from working in, a bank. And I'd say it's the minority of white parents that are doing this too, because a lot of them don't know themselves. Put them, if you have decent credit or good credit, you need to put them on as an authorized user before they're even 18. It establishes them right off the bat. It changes what they can do and how quickly they can do it. It's just a lot of education that needs to happen that's not going on. It's not going to happen at school. Parents are going to have to, parents or like I said, friends, aunts, uncles, anyone who knows needs to make an effort to let the younger generation know at an early enough age, and to talk to even their parents about ways that they can help their child start from the starting gate and not from behind the pack. Because that's happening. That's what's happening. You know, you got some kids that are starting off at 18 with a foot ahead or 5 feet ahead of everybody else. You know, so I think it's really education.
I've long thought that they needed to have a life skills class when you're a
Oh,
senior
yes.
in high school, and maybe
Oh,
that's
yes.
too late, but at least that would be like
It would
on
help.
the precipice of when you're about to become an adult. And some Black families, you know, I think to our detriment, have that hard line attitude, and maybe white families too, I don't want to assume, but you know, you're 18, you're on your own, go do it now, you know, go take care of it, you're an adult, or you got to get out of my house or do something, you know, and all of a sudden the whole dynamic gets shifted within a couple months of graduation, which I think can be very jarring for a young person, you know, whereas I think a lot of times, and it might be because of generational wealth, that families that have a more stable background or affluence, they kind of slowly integrate their child into that independence, and they give them kind of a nest egg to get started with. Because I know too, my parents are educated, college educated, but I wasn't taught about finances. You know what I mean? I wasn't taught anything about it. And, you know, just went to college, got my little credit card they were offering on campus. I didn't know anything about interest rates. I did notice that when I started working in New York, my coworker once had her bank statement, her credit card statement out on her desk. And I saw her limit. And I was like, how did she get a $10,000 limit at like 20 something, you know, years old? And mine was like minuscule. So I know that they do differences with that as well, in terms of what the amount of credit they allow us to get just out of the gate. But there's also another point that I wanted to get, you know, the community's thinking on, because there's this idea in the Black community that we are too into the external, I want to floss, I want to have on my, you know, my chains. I mean, I know at Oakland High, that's what it was like, gold chains, Fila this, you know, the Fendi bag. And, you know, and I in order to
fit in,
assimilate, fit in, I went right on with it. Like, okay, that's what we're doing. And I think also when you're younger, there's more of a desire to kind of flex, and, you know, you got your lingo you and your friends use, and you got your little look and your style. And that's kind of like a big part of your identity. And I don't know if that's, you know, the thing is, you know, from seeing my daughter go to a school with people who had a lot of affluence and a lot of money, and the toll that took even on her own psyche. Like, we weren't poor, but I didn't have a winery. You know what I mean? I stop off to Italy on the winter break, you know, with friends. And so because they have that freedom of movement and of, you know, affluence, I'm just, you know, she said, I was in class the other day, she was telling me, and my friend just dropped like $500 on a few items of clothing in class while we were in class, just ordered them online. And, you know, so when you're having to see that kind of wealth around you and how cavalierly people can just throw around money, I think it does do something to your psyche. You know, you want that too. You want to be able to buy some clothes on a whim or go on a trip, and, you know, and I just wonder, how do we get that balance? Because I think it's going to take sacrifice and kind of like a redefining of our values as a collective in order to gain any wealth. Like, anyone knows, if you want to get somewhere, you have to get to the mindset of like, I have enough. I'm not going to spend, I'm saving for this, I'm planning for that. And I think sometimes in the Black community, we don't have that. We have a mentality of, I want to do it now.
Well,
And
I
I think
think
this
also,
people need to start telling the truth. Because we can talk about financial literacy all day. We can talk about how white people put their kids on their credit cards. But what we don't talk about is the mom or the dad not telling their kids, look, I only make $15 an hour, and this is how much bills are a month. Instead, we teach our kids, oh, you got to work 3 times hard to compare to some white person. And then your kids believe that money is limitless. Because you make sure Christmas is going to happen. You make sure when school starts is going to happen. You make sure if you go in the store, it's no questions asked. They don't know that you're going broke or it's going negative. They don't know that you had to work. Yeah, you know, they don't know. I work 10 extra hours for you to get this. You know, they don't know that I have seen people who we can say, oh, parents put their kids on their credit cards at 14, they turn 18. I know 4 grown people who are horrible with money, but their family has money and they're paying their bills.
Right.
Or they paid for them to get married, or they're paying their car note, even though they have this great job. I just feel like before, you don't have to have a degree in finances. You don't even really have to go to a class. If you could just speak your truth. If your kids know at 5, this is how much money mommy or daddy got this week. After I paid all the bills, this is what's left. And do you see how I need to go from this day to that day, and how maybe you can't get it right now, but you can get it later? If you can teach your kids that, at that point, your kids start to learn, 1, the value of money, 2, the access it gives you and the things you can obtain, and 3, they begin to think about, well, I know I want more. So what do I need to do to get more? They become critical thinkers.
I got a question. So, because I agree completely. And I think, like I've told you guys, like I've got a sister, and my sister, because like I don't have children. And so my lifestyle looks very different than her lifestyle. And so she will send my nieces and nephews, and she's like, you know, let me shoot you an extra 100, make it lavish, because she's trying to get them in the mindset of waiting, because she had her first child at 13. And so she's trying to show them, like, don't follow in my footsteps. This is what it could look like for you. So basically, she makes my life look way better than what it really is for my nieces and nephews. But I say that to say, Monique, I get the message and I agree with the message completely. But at what is the line between, you know, being transparent and being truthful, and putting additional worry and stress and potential trauma on a child by letting them know the severity of the situation?
I think it's only worry and trauma if you make it worry and trauma. If you go and operate in your house that you're worried and you're crying because bills can't get paid and you're always talking about it, your children love you. You're like God to them. They don't want you to hurt. So if you're making it seem like your issue with money is bad and it's harming you, that's what your kid's gonna do. There have been times with my daughter, I'm like, girl, we ain't got $5. Sometimes I might just say that because I don't want to buy it. But she'd be like, okay, cool. Because I don't walk around the house like, oh my God, I couldn't get you this. And if I could, I would. I just don't have those conversations with her. She just knows it's a boundary. I asked my mom, and this time she said no, but she knows when she gets something, I'm going to come through. Depends on what it is. I think we set the tone in our home for our kids, and how, because beyond you, they have to go in the world. So the way you teach them how to react to things in your home is how they're going to react when they go in the world. And I think a lot of times moms, and I'm not saying you shouldn't worry, but I think a lot of times moms and dads, depending on who's keeping the kids, you will show your emotions of how difficult it is, but you don't really just break down, you know, this is what money does, and we just can't do it right now. And then the kids are like, I'm fine, because you give them other things that give them happiness and joy.
Some kids. I mean, I see, I agree.
It's all relative.
But I think there's an impact of society and what you're seeing around and what you're seeing represented in the media as desirable for wealth, and what you're seeing as desirable as a woman. I mean, nowadays with plastic surgery and everything in the media, for young girls to be considered attractive, there's a lot that's got to go down.
And again, that's at home. Do you know how many people are in their home and that doesn't faze them? Again, that starts at home. If you live in a home where people are going, oh my God, she's so beautiful. Oh my God, she's so cute. Oh my God, I want her body. And then they go online and they see it. They're getting 2 confirmations. If they live in a home where it's like, you're beautiful, and they know they're beautiful before somebody tells them what beauty is, they will be in a space to say, oh, she's beautiful too. And it doesn't faze them. A lot of things we don't want to admit, because if we admit it, we have to think about it. And then we have to think about it, our ego kicks in. And then, like, a lot of people don't want to admit, oh, now I got to face this. But that's just my opinion based on the observation that I see from other people.
No,
like music define people.
I was going back to what Jasmine was saying about how do we go forward with teaching our children. I was saying that I would teach my daughter that it's all relative. Like, don't limit yourself to thinking that you can just have to work to create wealth in the US when you can find other opportunities in other places. Like, it's easier for immigrants to come to the US and make it. The same can be said about us going abroad to other places and being able to make ways for ourselves as well. I mean, even here, Nandi, we had this conversation before with Dinery about how if you get an ICAMA, you can basically get a bank account and start getting loans here. And I think it's, how many years is it, Nandi?
The ICAMA?
Yeah.
It's 5 or 7?
Yeah,
7.
yeah. After being here for I think 5 or 7 years, you can do that. As well as other African countries, like in Ghana, it's relatively easy to create businesses there. Even in Thailand, all the people I met in Thailand came for vacation and basically just decided they were going to stay and started businesses, because you're looking at what that relation is to the dollar, and the cost of living is a whole lot cheaper. And it's much easier to take whatever money you saved up and start a business elsewhere. So that's one of the things that I plan to instill in my daughter. It's like, okay, don't think that you're just stuck here, you know, trying to figure out whether or not you can accomplish the American dream, but you can take this elsewhere and start somewhere. So
I think that's a great point. I mean, I didn't think about living overseas until my brother exposed me to it, but it is a great option, I think, especially for people of color, in terms of just, you know, a break. You know, there's a break. I go back to, I do think that the media and the influences of the society, when I go back, the news I hear, the television programming, I do think that it affects our mind. And I think that when Alan was talking about the calculated breakdown of how they have amassed this whole system to keep people in a certain position, that's a big part of it. Because mind control does trigger how your brain thinks and what it wants and what it thinks it needs. Even if every day you're at home, you know, telling your child how beautiful they are and how much you love them. They go out into society and they see who the guys want to date and they see what's considered success. And it becomes a battle in between holding your own in that. And so I think when you go overseas, you get a break from all of that programming in your mind. You can only take in how much you want. And then you're kind of immediately in a place of stability and able to build from there while learning about another culture. And you learn more about yourself as an American, because I know it becomes this weird thing of people talking about America and wanting to diss America from other countries. And I'm in this weird position of like, like we do have our problems. We've got some race problems, but I am an American. You know what I mean? I do have pride in being an American in my country. So it becomes this weird kind of little thing of me being like, don't go too far. It's like when people talk about your family and you're like, hey, I can talk about it, but don't you say anything.
You may be right, but shut up.
Like, people never get anything, and how difficult that can be navigating. Like, you never get anything, and everything is always an external example of how life should be. Like, you never get nothing. You have no foundation.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Monique. It does start at home. I do think that, you know, just having worked in education for so many years and being a therapist and working with primarily teenagers as my target population, I'm seeing more and more kids who talk about, you know, that foundation that they have at home, how, you know, they were encouraged, but teenagers are mean. Middle schoolers are the meanest, y'all. Middle schoolers are hell. Side note, not relevant to the book, but middle schoolers are rough. But on to the next point before we actually move into chapter 1. One of the things too that I think we undermine is that I think that Black families would have a lot more wealth than what we are giving credit for, because of location and because of redlining and the identification as certain areas as being less than. And this came about because, so my boyfriend is studying for the real estate exam here. And one of the questions is like, what is the greatest determinant of the cost of a property? And the answer is location. And so this spawned us on a conversation where I purchased my home last year and I'm in a really good area. I'm on a little dead end road surrounded by all old people. Like people behind me have horses, but I'm still in the city limit. So like a good area, right? But my home is relevant to the area around. And because I'm in close proximity to downtown, my home is valued at less than if I were going to the area where my job is located, where my same household, my same home, the exact same size, and probably less land is probably worth triple the value. So how many of us have grandparents who own property, who own homes, but because of the stigma to the neighborhood, they are valued at less than what they're worth? And because that's money, that's where generational wealth comes from, is the property and the value in that property and the ability to leverage it, the ability to get additional money. And if grandma has this house that's a 4 or 5 bedroom, but because it's located on this street, it's only valued at $70,000. Whereas this person on the other side of town has this little 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom house, but because of its location is valued at $300,000. Like, how do we, I don't know. Like, I think that's just, I don't know if that's something I wanted a response to or just something that's just bothering me that I want to put out there.
Well, it's very important that they take, every neighborhood goes through like a rebirth, a death basically, and a rebirth. And I've noticed it even in the house my mom lives in. She doesn't own it, but I've seen it happen to the neighborhood, like how it's changed and how the prices have changed. And I'm seeing, because of where it is in Oakland and how the, Silicon Valley and San Francisco and everything, it's, the prices have gone, even for, this is like for the ghetto, the prices are like 600,000. So if you don't hold on to what, because that neighborhood used to be all Black families owning homes, unless you lived in the few apartment buildings that were on that street. But all the rest of the homes were owned by Black families. Not anymore. As soon as that happened, if you can't hold on to that, if you can't hold on to that home and not lose it at some point within the family, that's it. You're out. You're priced out. You got to go, an hour and a half away to go back in, to drive every day to go to work, because you're not going to be able to afford anything within that area. It changes, like I said, over time. It's still considered the ghetto, but the prices don't reflect that any longer.
Yeah, I mean, that's gentrification. Like,
yeah.
Oh yeah, because when you said that, I think about gentrification. A lot of times with Black people, our people, our goal is own a home so your kids or whatever can always have somewhere to go. And when it comes to gentrification, today it might be the hood and nobody wants to be there. And then one day somebody decides, we think this will be a great area and we'll build up these stores and these cute little boutiques. And the thing about us getting our homes, like I was going back to us not really sharing with our kids, the bills, or not looking into other areas that we quote unquote think we can afford, is that when they come in and they decide to do that, they'll just take a name out of their ass and be like, we decided this is going to be worth $500K. And then this house has been in your family for 20, 30 years, and all of a sudden property taxes. And you have people, they just can't afford it, and then they lose their home because somebody decided the area was worth a certain amount. Even with that, I think for us to be able to keep the homes, it's just instill in us that not only is this home belongs to us, but that's like a false truth. It's yours, but it's really not yours. It's whatever the government or your local council decides the value of it, and you need to make sure that you can pay for what they ask for at any given time. It kind of goes to us saving, looking at different areas, how they're changing, what their average fees are for taxes, property taxes, and things of that nature. Because I just feel like the longer we go by, the more we're going to be losing homes, even though we're trying to build generational wealth. Because somebody has this great idea of gentrification. That's
And
a big concern.
we get undercut on the front end too, not just the back end, but even with purchasing and, you know, being undervalued and losing equity before you even start out, because you're paying an exorbitant amount on the front end and not even realizing that, you know, just because I'm Black, this is what they're charging me, as opposed to the white people that have come through for the same portfolio with the same loan amount and credit score.
It kind of reminds me of the beef they were talking about on Facebook between Jeezy and and Gucci. I was like, do you know the amount of people I know? I personally haven't got there, but the amount of people I know that hire a lawyer, get their LLC, the lawyer is white, or they have a white real estate agent, just to be able to invest in these properties so they won't know it's a Black face that's buying it.
That's true.
Which is unfortunate, but they make sure to put it in an LLC and they make sure to show that white face in order to get it. Or if you're selling a home, take down all your family pictures. I've been knowing that for like 15, 20 years. Take them down because they're going to buy it.
Yeah, you got to play chess right along with them.
Yeah, my boyfriend has a very Caucasian sounding name. But he purchased a home last year as well. And whenever the guy came, like the seller came after like contracts had been signed and everything else, they came in to actually meet after the fact, because that was all done through their realtors and the attorney for the estate. And he was just talking about like the look of shock on the guy's face whenever he got out the car, because the guy had never seen him before. And I mean, it's like it's the brick house on the hill, looking down over the city. And so he was just kind of talking about how, like, just how that felt to kind of be like, you know, yeah, I've worked hard to be able to get this, but also like, why are you giving me the side eye? Because you didn't expect the person buying to look like me.
Why do you even have to meet is my question. After
they didn't have to
signed?
He was going, no, it wasn't signing anything. He was going over to get something. I think they were trying to figure out if something was going to be written into the contract that it was staying as is or getting rid of it. And so he was having to go over to look at it to discuss it. And so that was the only reason that they met from the get-go. But yeah, but I think that y'all are right. But gentrification is definitely real. And I think it has a greater impact on us than what we realize. Because, and then it's also kind of that mentality of, you know, our grandparents were kind of that little window where Black people were getting into home ownership. So most of our grandparents, I'll say at least amongst my friends that I grew up with, owned their home in Griffin. But I think that now that they are getting sick or they are being hospitalized, I think that the priority of keeping the home in the family is kind of being swept away as well. Like it's not prioritized anymore.
And I think also too, from what I've seen from experience, because I'm usually concerned about my grandmother's home in Griffin, but you'll have people go out and they'll say, I don't want to go back to that dump. Like they don't see the value of remodeling. Remodeling takes too much work. Why would I want to live there? And they don't realize the value. And they're like, well, I'll just sell it for this small amount and go on with my life. When there's some investor, gentrification, that will buy it and change the whole entire area. And I kind of see that in our hometown, you know, unfolding before our eyes. But it's like, how do you even get those people to realize the value of what you have? Even if you think it's not up to your standards, because a lot of us have moved on and got bigger and better things, but it's still a value. How can we get you to know that importance, or do you just want to throw away your history altogether? But at what cost?
Yeah, I think that's what happens a lot. People, because of the, if someone like your grandparent or something lives there their whole adult life, and then they end up getting older and either dying there or going into a home or whatever, or some moving in with somebody, another relative, because they can't take care of themselves. People are looking at that short term, that money right there and selling. And I don't know how you get people to see the importance of it. I mean, I've gone through it with, my relatives in a foreign country. My grandmother died, and when I found out how much they sold her house for, yeah, it needed repairs, but had you given us the option, we would, I don't know how we could have, but we would have tried to find a way to buy it. They sold it for like, I don't even want to say it, but I swear to God, it was like $13,000 just to get rid of it.
Wow.
Yeah, because everybody else had their own home and they didn't care, and they think we're rich here in America, so whatever. They didn't realize how much that meant to us just from a historical and emotional part,
Right.
But it's
Right.
hard. I mean, it happens every day here in America. People, their parents get old and they're thinking about the short term instead of the, I don't know, there's no emotional attachment anymore. And there's no long-term thinking of, yeah, it may take a while, and yeah, I may have to put some of my own money in this, but this could be worth something even more if you hold on to it. It's not, nobody's holding on to anything anymore. It's like, let's get new, let's get better, and everything's being, let go. And eventually that catches up to you, because once you split it, you're hardly getting anything. But had you held on to it, it would have mattered a whole lot more, because just having that property, having that as an asset and building from there. I mean, it's a lot of foreigners that come here, and a lot of them will live in one house, and they'll all pool their money together, and then eventually they branch out and one person gets their own home, and then, the rest of them are still there, and then the next person. And we don't like to do that in America. We don't like to pool our money or work together. It's each person, everybody for themselves. Even within families, everybody for themselves within a family, and nobody's trying to like build together to accomplish anything.
I saw, and I need to find that article. There was this Black man that decided that he was going to build a house for his whole family. His family, his sisters and brothers and their families, and basically he built this really big house that they sectioned off into like separate apartments, but all of them share in the utility bills, and buying groceries and doing chores around the house, as well as the property taxes. And we don't think to do stuff like that anymore. Everyone wants to be extremely disconnected and independent and out on their own, not realizing that doing that we're able to take care of each other.
And I'm not gonna lie, that's me. No, seriously, and I'll tell you why. Because the more you ladies talk, I realize a lot of times, I believe a lot of us are not keeping those properties and knowing the value and knowing the generational wealth is due to our experiences in childhood. Like, I hated sharing a home when I was a kid. It was me, my grandmother, my mom, my brother, and my two uncles. I didn't have a problem with staying with my grandmother or one of my uncles, but one of them just drove me crazy. Like one of those toxic families.
Yeah.
I just felt like it wasn't enough room. I did not want to share a bathroom. Like, I just was like, when I grow up, I'm going to always make sure I have more than enough room. I need my space. But I also know the value of, like you were saying, now that I'm older, of keeping these things, but I don't necessarily want to live with you either for my own sanity. And I think now that more people are talking, it's like, I'd rather not be attached to my past. Because some people it's just too painful, or it's too much of it reminds them of struggle or where they don't want to go, and they rather just cut ties from it, which is unfortunate. You know, people might have to do therapy about that. But I'm the classic example of that. I don't want to live in the same house with you.
Right. Not everybody. That's not going to be the route for everybody.
No, it's not going to be the route for everybody. I was just saying that, you know, for some people, if they decided to pool their resources and their heads together, that would be another way in order to promote, you know, generational wealth. Because I'm like the complete opposite. I wouldn't mind living with, you know, any of my family members, because we always had, you know, so much fun growing up. And, you know, a lot of them were 420 friendly. So that's
very important.
Issues,
that's very important. You got to get that clear from the start.
Just light up and talk about our differences.
Makes everything better, 420. Oh no, yeah, I probably could live. I know who I could live with.
Right, there's a difference.
Like the whole thing.
There's a difference between, you know, somebody living with you because they can't make it on their own for whatever their reasons are, and then the difference being living with other people like-minded that are also trying to achieve something. Because you definitely don't want somebody who's dragging you down because they don't want to get it together, you know. So
because I know, like, and we talk about, you know, kind of discriminatory remarks and such, but like whenever we think about the Mexican ideology, like you will have 4 or 5 families living in a house and they will do that for 1 or 2 years, and we're like, I don't know how the hell they're doing that. But then you realize that when it's broken down, they're paying $100 a month for their share of rent and utilities, and they're stacking the rest, and then they go pay for a gigantic house in cash and move them and their family into it. So I think that even if we could shift that mindset from not necessarily being I got to live with somebody permanently, but to the idea of if I have someone with a like mindset who wants to live together so we can both save to be on our own, I think that would be beneficial as well. Moving into actually chapter 1. Good discussion, y'all, but slow progress. It's called 40 Acres or a Savings Bank. And I stopped to so I was an English teacher, so I'm definitely one of those people who looks at chapter titles before I actually read the chapter, and try to think about why would the two be considered parallel, and like that's kind of how they did it. They were making them pick one over the other. And where we have been ingrained for so long to save, the idea of our ability to save possibly outweighing that 40 acres, or that 40 acres being able to give us leverage, like that would have been a true conundrum of that time period. But they do talk about, she starts out talking about slavery. And a couple of things, they said that currency of the South was the slave. They refer to them as articles of commerce, and says that at that point, 3.2 million slaves are worth 1.3 billion in market value, almost equal to the entire gross national product. And I think that we're taught the impact of slavery on the US economy, but this, I think, is the first time I realized how big of an impact it truly had. Like slavery was the US economy. It was a big impact, it was the US economy.
And it still is. It definitely still is. And we just talked about how because of that, they didn't change it. They didn't outlaw it. They made it an extension of the prison industrial complex, which is still responsible for a lot of the economy today. It's another extension of it. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we just finished talking about that in the last chapter of the New Jim Crow. So
yeah, and I mean, it's true. And I mean, and that goes into why, you know, Blacks only make up 1% of the wealth, because the place is kept, and there are definitely ceilings that are put there to make sure that that is not changed.
Mm.
I
And
thought
if
it
you
was.
let me tell it, corporate is a part of that too.
You said what?
If you let me tell it, corporations are a part of that too.
Mhm.
I mean,
Oh
their
yeah.
jobs, we're getting paid, but to me, it's still slavery.
Mhm.
Small amount of money, work,
Right.
build the economy.
Oh yeah, like I sent a message out. So I'm one of those people who randomly sends my friends motivational messages as they come in my mind. And one of the things that I sent last week was just kind of a reminder of don't spend so much time making someone else money that you don't take the time to work on your side hustle to bring in your money. Um, so that just kind of feeds into what you're saying. Like we give everything to a job, and oftentimes we give so much to a job that we don't give to ourselves, and we don't position ourselves to ever move beyond
Mm.
that. But she talked about the role of churches in the banking system. And I think that for all of us to grow up saying that we never really had a lot of instruction on money. But I know I grew up in the church, Shonda, I know you did, and I'm assuming at least a couple other people here did. Like, where was that lost? Like, at what point did the church stop teaching about finances, and why? And do you think that that is a role that they should step back into?
Church never taught it. I never learned about money in the church outside of you need to give 10% plus.
I didn't either. And that's what I'm saying. But so that's what I'm saying. We all grew up in the church, but we were never taught that. But the book talks about how much of a big role church played in banking back in the day, which means
Right.
I'm presuming that they were teaching. So at what point was that lost? And do you think that that's something that the Black church should do as far as like getting people back on track?
All right, so Jasmine and to everyone else, here's the cold hard truth to the answer to that question. Well, here's one of the many cold hard truths. So number one, where was it lost? It was lost at the beginning. So when a lot of our people came out of slavery and started preaching, they knew about scripture, but they knew it from the standpoint of what a white slave owner was teaching them, and not necessarily for themselves. Nat Turner and others who were fortunate enough to figure out for themselves because they got their own understanding were able to get clear discernment and was able to follow in the direction of the discernment they were given. But to answer the question, because we have such a strong legacy of poverty than we do of wealth, and because we've been indoctrinated, not necessarily taught prosperity, but taught more about poverty, that a lot for some reason this religious dogma and stigma has found its way into the church, specifically the Black church, because a lot of times people will say that they think that the less you have, the more you have. Like the poorer you are, the holier you are. When you look, poverty and holiness are two different words. When you look at the synonyms for poor or holy, not one word will you see they have in common. In fact, you'll see more antonyms and synonyms between poverty and holiness. So that's one mistake I would say, because they get scriptures such as it's better for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. That's a clear misinterpretation. Or what profits a man to gain the world but lose his soul? Like they read but they don't understand. And scripture clearly tells you, in all thy getting, get understanding.
Right.
A lack of understanding, number one. Another thing I would say is because we got over 70 plus thousand Black churches, and because our Black banks are limited, and because we don't own the blocks, I would say most churches don't even own, when most Black churches do not even own the buildings that they housed in. Some white man probably owns it and we're being economically exploited. And because we have no alternative, we don't know how to, because we're not having a conversation of the importance of group and cooperative economics. I think a lot of them are afraid that they'll be cut off from who's supplying them with what they do have. And that's what I believe. I could be wrong.
I agree with what you're saying, DeAndre. And I think that whole not getting an understanding is another one. And then when the churches kind of became businesses and corporations themselves, and people not really being what we consider called to preach, but taking it up more so as a profession, and swindling their congregations out of their money. Because I've seen people talk about, oh, you know, my light bill due, but I had to tithe. And I'm like, okay, but I didn't see anywhere in the Bible where it said Jesus wanted you to be without electricity. So I'm trying to figure this one out. I don't think he wanted your electricity to be cut off, but if you want to go that route, okay, fine. But yeah, just not really understanding any of the scripture, and just being real true followers and not questioning certain things.
You brought up a good point, because I think the only part, if you want to call it banking, I don't know if I would call it that, is you better make sure you give 10%, because if you don't, God's going to get you. There's some kind of way you're going to be cursed. So you always need to give your 10%. You always need to give the pastor a love offering to anybody else. Like the only banking we were taught, kind of like DeAndre was saying, you need to be poor, but you also need to give your money away and serve, like right. Jesus served. Like that's the only banking that I can think of, if you want to classify it as that, is to give, but don't try to receive. Because if you receive, that's not of God.
And just coming from someone that's heavily involved in church himself, I can go ahead and tell y'all straight up that there are enough pastors. There's the most taboo subjects that exist in our society, I would say, between religion and politics. Money has to be ranked at least as number 3, if not number 1, because I think, according to the statistics, most marriages, the one of the main problems that occurs in most marriages is in fact finances. Mm-hmm. I would say that a lot of pastors don't talk enough about that. They don't talk enough about money and other stuff. I'm not going to get involved in other things they don't discuss about. That if more discussions were had, more solutions to certain problems would be available.
I tend to kind of have a counter viewpoint of this whole thing about the church being involved in finances for the larger Black community. From my perspective, I think that at that time coming out of slavery, and I mean, I know it still persists today, but I think the church had a larger influence and a larger kind of impact on the Black community coming out of slavery, as I think one, as a means to try to feel salvation for what we were going through, and kind of that whole idea of we're going to get ours in the afterlife. And also, I think it's some form of control in a way, in terms of getting us to accept some of our position. And I think that the religion is so diverse and it can be divisive. And so I think if you're looking for something that can be more inclusive of everyone, I wouldn't really want the church to have that role in terms of finances. I think it gets murky. I think that it should be more, like at home, or just through knowledge community programs or things like that, where we're learning about wealth, or like how people have mentioned doing cooperative financial type programs or businesses with people or things like that in order to try to build our wealth.
That makes sense. And also, when I think about it, I think too, when it comes to the Black church and when you think about banking, a lot of it was just, like you were saying, it was more of support. So when I talk to older generations, they'll say, the church is so different. I remember if you tithe or you needed help, the church, they were in the community helping the community. Like they helped their members. Even though you gave your 10%, you knew that if you had a time of struggle, somebody was there to help you. And after they helped you financially, they also, gave you wisdom and knowledge of what to do next. But what I see as I think about it, the shift is you can be a member for 10 years. If you ask for help, they're talking about how long you've been in the church. First of all, are you a member? And then if we help you, you got to fill out an application and we may give you $100.
That is true. Very true.
And they're never really in the community unless they're ready to just advertise you come.
But you got a point, because look at, and DeAndre talked about this before, but look at the surrounding community of the churches. I mean, Griffin specifically, because it's where we're from, but just look at how the surrounding communities look.
Yeah, because I've seen a lot of them go out of the city. That blows my mind too. Either out of the city or out of the country and quote unquote do missionary work.
It's really a trip.
It's
a luxury trip.
and they'll go back home and their members are struggling. And then you're like, can you help them? Oh, that's just them. They don't need no help. And it's like, I don't.
Bought the pastor a new truck.
Yeah, and I feel like that was, now that I think about it, that was more of the example of banking. Like, you put your money into the church, we feed you spiritually, but we're also going to make sure you're taken care of. And I think that probably has changed. You know, the older generation I talked to, they were probably born like in the 50s, 60s. So I'll say for me personally, if I can think back, probably like in the 90s for me, realizing that people are like, well, if you're not a part of this church, or you don't fill out this application, or if you never tithe, I'm not helping you. You don't come to none of the meetings, so why should I help you? And it's like, because they need help. But where is the money?
It doesn't matter that your grandma been putting all her change purse into the church for 80 plus years, but we can't help you.
We can't help you. Or, you know, you came one time, why do you need help again? You know, not really knowing their members or the member needs, because you don't necessarily have to know that person personally, but like you were saying, Yashonda, you know your community. What are their needs and what are you doing with this money? That was kind of our way of saying this is banking. Our banking is supporting one another. So I'll say for me, probably like late 90s is when I started seeing like, oh, you're not supporting unless, you know, your process is more stringent than the banks. So why?
Right.
But on page 13, and just kind of going off of that, and just kind of that inability to get help, it talks about Abram Harris, a prominent Black economist of the 1930s, listed the barriers to Black enterprise before the Civil War in the following order. And as I was reading it, I was like, literally ain't nothing changed. Number one is the difficulty of obtaining capital and credit. Number two is low wages, competition for jobs, and immigration. Number three is mob violence. Maybe not the mob violence, but we do still have a lot of city violence. It's just changed names a little bit. Occupational restrictions, prohibitions against owning certain types of property. We're not technically prohibited, but if you can't afford it, you still prohibit it. Denial of the right to sue, which I think that we're seeing repeatedly over and over again on the front and center with especially police departments. Restrictions against settlements in the West, and civic and educational handicaps. And I don't even know that I would change the order of them. Does anyone think that they would shift the order to make it more, I guess, relevant for today? Because I really think it's the same, but I want to see what other people say.
I think it's the same. Although I might push up civic and educational handicap.
In my mind, that's what I would push up. I think that's higher now than some, because mob violence I would just label under violence, like Jasmine said, just another name. But then I would push up civic and educational handicaps. I think that's a big part now too. And
so maybe swap that with occupational restrictions.
Yeah, I would put that up higher. I think that it's a lot. I mean, from when I remember graduating high school, in terms of the ability to get into a UC or a school like that, or a good university, I think that now things are much tighter in terms of, you know, the ability of someone, if they're coming from a certain station in life, to get into these schools and get these opportunities. I think it's much more difficult.
It costs much more now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it sucked when they got rid of trade.
Yeah, but you know, they're trying to push that again now.
Because I don't know if you remember, I think that started with my class. I don't think it was with your class. But I remember with my class, you could graduate with a college prep and a trade, and they sent you to learn a trade. And that was your diploma for high school. And then they was like, we're going to get away from that. You either go to college or you just finish school.
They still had it. I came out in 04. We had people graduate on the trade program.
Okay. Because I think for a lot of us, when it came to Blacks and our money and our economics and our power, was because it was more entrepreneurs because you knew a trade.
Right.
You knew how to do things and fix things and make money, and we could work amongst each other or barter or pay each other, and you knew a trade. And then out of nowhere, someone said, well, you need an education, and this is how you make more money. And then trades kind of just
stop being put.
When if only I knew then what I know now.
A lot of the things are Blacks trying to do these things. That's what makes me kind of upset in terms of like when they talk about immigrant groups and what they do and how they come and they live together and they pool their money. But I think that for so long, we have all been trying so hard to come up. You know, that example of the bank at the end where they just took their money, basically, it sounds like, well, what are we supposed to do when, you know, you're making laws that we can't grow our own food on our own land, which is just like, what? Laws that we can't fish or hunt. We only can grow cotton. And then they say, well, why aren't you guys trying harder? It's like if you lock a kid in a room for 4 weeks and you never let him come out, he might lose some of his motivation. He might be affected by it. He might not be as driven to go succeed. You know, we have been trying repeatedly. They burn down our areas, and it's like it almost is like it has to be a secret because Black people like being around Black people. We don't have a problem wanting our own communities. I mean, it's not like I don't want to interact with other groups. I love diversity and culture, but I have no problem being around, you know, people that are like me. You know, there's a comfort level in that, and just humor and lifestyle or food or whatever. And so it just seems like it has to almost be a secret because they don't want it. We don't have an issue working hard. We've pulled ourselves up to great extents to overcome all this oppression and violence that's been, you know, put against us. The lynchings, the raping, the random killings now, it's like they won't stop. So it's like almost like we have to do it in secret. We can't go through their system. We can't tell them what we're doing. We have to build, you know, global expat communities where we have places where we can go and support each other. If the church is going to do something, it can't be known. You know what I mean? Because they're going to shut it down if it gets known.
The question comes into, is that even feasible to do? Because the dollar runs the world, not just America. The dollar runs the world. And how is it possible to create something self-sustaining without involving yourself with the e-commerce of the United States money system?
I think we have to involve ourselves in terms of our ultimate goals. I don't know if those can always be known. We do have
at a point now that
I think we need to start looking at some other avenues.
Yeah, other avenues. And you know, I used to hear people say integration was the worst thing for us. And when I used to say it, I never understood it. But now that I get older, I realize it. Like we're in their system. So like Yashana was saying, you create your own avenues. There's gonna be a group of people that have to create it, and there's gonna be another group of people that has to infiltrate it to get what you need. Like you have to play the game, the art of war. I bring that up all the time. Well, they integrated us. Now what are you gonna do?
I think that should be on our reading list too, FYI. It ain't a Black book, but we should read it anyway.
What?
The Art of War.
Oh, I've never read.
How can you take your enemy and make your enemy bless you? You know, I think you can make my enemies have blessed me. But it's like at this point, you're Black. This is what we're in. Create our own avenue, but you also need to infiltrate their system, play their system against them. How can we do that?
Well, Shonda, it's 12:30, but we ain't done.
It's so funny. But this is one of those things where there's gonna be a lot of discussion, regardless, because everything is so relevant to what's going on today. It's like the more things change, the more they remain the same.
Right.
there's a lot of feelings and emotions involved because we're still dealing with this crap. So yeah. Mm. I know 90's about to go to bed, but if y'all got another 30,
you're not gonna grab a drink tonight.
Drink.
You gotta have fun.
Girl, our work day started today. You know, our work week starts on Sunday, it goes through Thursday.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, well, I don't know. So the only other thing I think, if I'm skipping through to throw in, was they talk about the Freedmen and the Freedmen's Bureau, how it became a bank, how Nani was talking about how it got ripped off and they started sending all the money everywhere else. But then on page 18, it started talking about how, since Johnson claimed that the laws of capitalism and free trade would allow the freedmen to accumulate land without any special help from the state. And so I went to start seeing about like statistics on what that looked like if he was making this claim so many years ago. And for the 2016 data was the most recent I could find. And it said that for education, 23% of Black people 25 or plus had a degree, and for whites it was 36%. So that's one, it shows the education level, which we've discussed and hit on. But the one that stood out was the median adjusted household income. In 2016, for Blacks was $43,300, for whites was $71,300 per household. And yeah, that just stood out. It was a lot. It's like almost twice as much.
Mm-hmm.
Right. She does that close to at the end of every chapter, right? Like with the introduction, she slaps us with the 0.5 to 1%, and then she slaps us with this one again.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane.
I thought it was interesting with them talking about the shift in the political parties, just with everything happening, how it was the Republicans that were so gung-ho to help the Black population and to pull them into the fold with their party. And then as they realized that it was actually hurting them more, they shied away from the subject and quit promoting Black equality.
Yeah, pushed them out of their leadership positions, all of that.
How the 15th Amendment was passed, but there were so many deliberate loopholes left in that it didn't actually mean anything. You know, we celebrated all the time with the right to vote, but realistically, Jim Crow laws and other things that were set in place about grandfathering and so forth still prohibited Blacks from voting at all.
Right.
I did not know about the military. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that every turn when you're listing off these things they're doing, they make it really, really difficult, you know.
They've been doing that since the beginning of time. And every time, you know, I told you I got hooked on Game of Thrones now, and I'm like, dang, these white folks are so savage. They still
It should change. It ain't changed.
Yeah, I watched because of that. I did watch the first episode of Games of Thrones, and at the end, when the guy pushed the kid out the window, I was done. I was like, I don't think I'm going for the next episode.
It's good. It's good. You got to keep going.
I can't watch that kind of stuff, and it upsets me inside. It's just like Pillars of the Earth. I don't know if anyone's read that book, where the person, I mean, they're going through generations of just horrible, just horrible things happening to the serfs, to the lower class people. And it's like, is justice ever going to be done? It gets really frustrating. And yeah, It's kind of the same thing. It's the same thing.
Is
justice ever going to be done? I don't know.
I want to say is that maybe it's not, maybe it's ascribing to a different set of values in terms of like what our expectation is of wealth and happiness, in terms of, you know, the system in power seems to never be able to have enough wealth.
Right.
There's billionaires and millionaires, and, you know, you need to have 15 cars. And so kind of, you know, I think as I've gotten older, my conception of wealth has really changed. And I do, they like the idea of promoting within our community, given to in America, the constraints of racism and the system that's in play in order for people to find their happiness. It's like, well, what is wealth to me?
Right.
You know, Moni talked about parents loving their kids and teaching them the value of education and having an adventurous spirit, one that might want to see more of the world. And it doesn't really always have to be about the money. I mean, I know we need money.
That's what I was saying. Yeah, I was saying it can be relative. Yeah,
it can be relative in terms of our wealth. If we have smaller communities with little tiny homes like they have in Japan or something or whatever that are cheaper, but just to have our conception of wealth change, you know, I think could be helpful in a way, because when you're comparing it to what they're saying is wealth, I think it can be like, wow, well, we'll never get there. You know what I mean?
The foundation of wealth is all about security and comfort, stability.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I've told
you and your generation, like I totally agree with that.
Well, I tell people all the time that if you think about money is nothing but the ability to buy your time to spend it how you want to spend it. That is all that money is. And so if you can find a way to spend your time and see that as wealth, then I think that you're in a good position, because it doesn't matter. The more millions you get in the bank, the only reason you want those is so you ain't got to go to work every day, so you can do what you want with your time. Right. You want to be able to afford that, you know, maid to come in to clean your house because you don't want to waste your time. Like, money is nothing but the ability to buy your time to spend how you want to spend it.
And that's the thing about when I was saying before about it being relative, because, for example, when I went to teach in the Republic of Georgia, like my salary compared to the local teachers, they thought that, you know, I was rich. You know, I had a house and a driver, and I was eating out every day. But it was really, no, I'm serious. For me, it was nothing. But to them, it's like, oh my God, she must, you know, make $1 million. But it's because the cost of living is just completely different. You know, so you could be living what is considered to be at poverty level at home, and then move to another country, and it's like, okay, you know, I'm in the upper class now. So people need to think about that too, making your retirement stretch, as opposed to having to, you know, struggle in the US with the high cost of living. You have to think about those things.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who are moving to Mexico and Thailand, even on Social Security, because their money stretches so wide. And they're like, I'm just going to move and retire, and I can live my best life better than I did in America. Like you were saying, with a driver or a chef, or they have access to all of these different amenities, and they're not breaking the bank.
Yeah, I was in the Bahamas back in February. And so the Bahamas, they don't use addresses. They have street names, and they will give it to you in proximity to like big places. But there's not an actual address for anything. And so the fact that I stay local when I travel, I don't like resorts. I do Airbnb. We were literally walking up and down the street, like looking for our Airbnb based off of the directions that were on the app. And so we got picked up by this lady, and it's a foreign country, YOLO, we get in the car with her. But it was a Black lady, and she said that she had been there. She knew exactly what we were talking about when I showed her the house. She was like, yeah, that's right around the corner. I'm going to take you, blah, blah, blah. And we were just talking to her, and she's like, yeah, I came down here on vacation from New York about 6 years ago. And she was a corporate attorney, and, you know, she's like, I was working 60, 70 hours a week. And she's like, I came down here on vacation and realized that I don't have to do that. Like she took her savings and she left, and she's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know this morning I was looking at Korea. I was like, yep, I might have to move there. My daughter goes to college.
I already have an exit plan.
Yeah.
I can't take it anymore. I have an
Yeah.
exit plan. I'm not retiring in the US. I'm not. I don't even want to be here now.
Yeah. Well, I have a question regarding retirement in the U.S. What are the complications of people retired in the U.S.? I have a family member that is in their early 70s and are still working, and
Yep.
I'm not confident about their ability to retire.
Yeah. It's the truth. They
It's
don't
the ability to
Social
live.
Security, if that is your only retirement income, is not enough to afford to pay rent, mortgage, anything like that. Maybe basic living like food and stuff, yeah, but it's not enough. My mom gets like I want to say $1,200 a month.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you live on that. I don't
Right.
know. I don't know how you live on
The
that.
knowledge that I know now.
Not in California. Maybe I don't know about other states, but I know
Nah,
in California,
I'm in Alabama, girl. We ain't no cheaper, and we still can't live on 1,200.
That's what I'm trying to instill in my daughter, if she can just buy her first home before she's 22. And the only reason why I say that, in the first home, I don't even want it to be her home that she lives in, but more like investing in a rental property for passive income, is because I feel like, we've been taught all of a sudden, we have better access to healthcare, you live longer. And so you have people in their 50s, late 50s, late 60s, and they're purchasing their first home or they're buying new cars. You're going to have to work. If you've been living check to check, you're going to have to work. And the average mortgage is 30 years. Now cars, it used to be if you bought a car, you paid it off in 3 years. Now I hear people saying, the term of my loan is 7 years. Excuse me? 8 years to pay off my car. What?
By
yeah,
that
'cause
time, you need another one.
the car
I
will
know.
break down before you're done paying it off. The car
Yeah.
will break down because they only make them to last like probably maybe 5 years if you're lucky.
And
And
we're
they do
living
that
in
on purpose. They do that on purpose so that you
And
have to
you
buy
better-
another one because there's not the same amount of money in a car lasting 10, 20 years than it is in it only lasting 5 years.
And if you know the shift in our economy, everything's subscription based.
Yep.
So the goal used to be you could pay something off. Now it's like if you want access to it, you're gonna have to pay. If you don't pay, you don't get access.
Well,
That's not gonna be a home in your car.
the only way I see retirement in the U.S. is not only you can't just rely on Social Security. You're going to have your own retirement that you've set up if your company doesn't have a 401k or whatever. And even with a 401k, you have to have been there so long and have taken so much of your check out to make it build up to something that would be able to last. It's made it really, really difficult to survive here in retirement. I don't even know how they're going to do it. They keep pushing the age on retirement back too. That keeps going later and later. So you're working so hard, and you got to work until you're damn near like 71 or 70 and a half or something. And then what? You get to enjoy a little tiny bit of life, but maybe only if you have enough to where you're not worried about being able to afford to live.
And by that point, you're too old to really enjoy it.
Right. Where are you going to go? What you going to do? You know what I mean?
I know someone.
Go ahead, DeAndre.
I was about to say I have a relative going through that right now. He's actually in the other room. But anyway, I was gonna say I wanted to address something with the 401k. Is that a legitimate, not necessarily legitimate, but is that something that we should be looking towards in terms of it bailing us out for retirement? Because if you recall, during this pandemic, how many people lost hundreds and if not thousands of dollars from their 401ks? And even before the pandemic, the compounding fees that were being charged to a lot of people's accounts were beginning to add up and take money out as well. I just want to go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, whenever you go through your job, a lot of those fees are taken on by the job because you're put in as a group account. And it's all about how it's your management of it. So for example, I've got 2 or 3 side hustles. And so I'm in a position where I am able to contribute my maximum amount on my 401k, and my director, because I work for a nonprofit, he literally called me. He's like, "Are you sure that this is how much you want to give?" "Yes, sir," because you got to match it. "Yes, that's how much I want to give." So if you're in a situation where your job is matching, then you are truly able to capitalize on it. Whenever you go through a recession, you are going to lose money. But the beauty of it is that you're able to do like IRAs and like smaller investments in different areas that you don't see as much of a loss. So like my personal stocks where I've bought this stock, and this stock, I've seen huge drops. But my 401k, yes, I have seen drops, but because they do investments in like groups or families of companies instead of just one family, the drops haven't been as significant.
Right. It can be beneficial. It just depends on what age you are when you start too, because when you're younger, you can go more aggressive, and yeah, you'll have bigger losses, but over time, it will be a better, you will have gained a lot more. But when you're, in your, if you're starting in your late 30s or 40s, you can't go aggressive like that because you can't afford to take that loss. And I hate the fact that 401ks are tied to the stock market, because you can take a loss. It's not like a pension when companies used to have pensions and they would put money in there, and then you would, when you retire, you get that pension also. That was the better way to go. But no, America thought, oh, with the whole greed, they thought, oh, here's a better way. Let's get rid of all the pensions and let them have to invest in the stock market and take losses. We can get more of their money. That, I hate the fact that the 401k is tied to the stock market. Yeah, you can make some gains, but a lot of people are going to take losses. And if they don't know, if their company, whoever's in charge of their portfolio for their company, if they're not, the basic involvement in it isn't, not like the lowest risk, then people are good. A lot of people have that 401k. They don't know that they can change the investments themselves. And if they're at a basic level, not low risk, they're going to take a lot of losses, and they don't know how to stop that from happening. Or even if they're, even if you don't have the knowledge and you're dabbling in it yourself, and you got all this stuff at high risk, and then the recession happens and you lost half your retirement, it's horrible. It's horrible. But I have to jump off, but I'll see you guys next week.
Okay, bye.
All right.
Well, I don't want to hold much longer either, because I do have a bunch I got to do today. But another thing that stood out, I told you I Google everything when I'm reading books that are supposed to be teaching me stuff, because I need to know that they're based on fact. The Black Bank that was built, when they talk about how they moved to this nice big, building with this nice facade in Washington, D.C., I Googled the location. It is located across the street from the current White House. So imagine, I guess I pointed that out to talk about how the media and propaganda and portrayal of things, like how you would put it in this prime location to have it closely associated and build that idea that it is safe in the minds. Is that whole I made it or we made it mentality. Look at where we are. Look at where this Black bank is located. Clearly, we have to be a credible source.
And that's true, because the crazy thing about that is they moved, but this was already when he was he had already started making those shaky deals with the money before. So it's basically to make it seem like they weren't struggling. Then to add insult to injury, when the shit hit the fan, you put the Black man in charge of the bank. You put Frederick Douglass.
Yes!
What?
So
says knowing that he had no banking experience, they were basing it off of his popularity and knowing that it would build credibility in the Black community to see his face. So that goes to highlight the naivety of the Black community. And has that changed? Do we still follow stuff because it's a familiar face?
Yeah, kind of like that new bank, Greenwood.
Yep. I thought, and you know what? I thought about that because she said every single time when there are these issues that we're really supposed to be fighting hard against and actually really bucking against the system, is when a black bank pops up.
Because that's the first thing I thought, Greenwood.
Right.
Yeah.
I said, man, this is insane. The way these dots are being connected. Like,
because to me, Greenwood, have you looked into it?
I've read over I read over a lot of their stuff, but I'm like, to me, this is almost going to like the Cash App.
It is. I read it and I was like, this is not for us. And the fact that for you to even get in or to be considered early, they want you to do the marketing scheme of add your friends and we'll bump you up.
Yeah.
Right? It kind of reminds me of what's the card that Russell Simmons did? Like green dot. Yeah, the rush card, like green dot. And I'm like, wow. When I was reading that, I was like, that reminds me of Greenwood. Like, how does that really help us?
Right.
Like, how is going to give us access to resources outside of us just going to a traditional bank, like a community bank?
Right.
You know.
What about the black banks that are still around, like the Citizens Trust and United? It's some bank called United Bank. Does anyone currently bank with a black-owned bank?
The Citizens Trust in Atlanta. I have an account there.
All right, how's that?
To me, it's just like any other bank. I can tell the restrictions. To me, it kind of reminds me of, and I don't do too much business with them. I just wanted to have an account there. But they do talk to me, but it kind of reminds me of credit unions because you can see they're on a smaller scale. But it's just like any other bank. At least you can go in person. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And talk to people versus just being online. But it's like any other bank.
All right.
Yeah, one of my former colleagues, he's got a business, and he posted this long rant about them probably about 6 months or so ago, because I guess he had been trying to figure something out with one of his cards, and he had poor customer service and all this other stuff. And I was reading the comments and people commenting, don't bash them publicly and blah, 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 because, right now that's not what we need in the Black community. And so I didn't comment. I didn't like it. I was just being nosy because I was kind of torn on what side to be on. Like, at what point do you give passes for bad customer service to support Black banking industry versus, and accepting that there are restrictions and there are limitations in their ability to do what a larger corporate bank has the ability to do versus having that expectation because you got my money.
Are you talking about the Citizens Bank?
Yeah.
I personally, I use them. So you know how sometimes you have an account, it's a checking, but I use it like a savings. Like that's money I just have to the side for whatever. Sometimes you have to be realistic. So you have to ask yourself, how do I want to support somebody? So like we were talking about, how do you define wealth, or what your needs are, your basic needs? I know that bank is only so big. So if I'm trying to get certain resources, it's not that I'm turning my back against my people, but I just know where the resources are. So I need to put more of my business and learn these bankers at this bank because they have access not just in Georgia, because I think Citizens Bank is only in Georgia and Tennessee. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's only like 3 or 4 banks. How can that compete with a bank who has multiple locations all over the United States and overseas?
That's true.
You can't. Like I bank with PNC. They just like invested how many billions of dollars for overseas banking? How can a bank with only 4 locations compete with that? They can't. I'm asking them something that they don't even have the capacity of doing.
You know what I tie mine to? And this is something I've learned. This is something I've learned just the past couple years. If anything happens, like really happens, guess what's going to go down first?
The smaller bank.
Right. And also, what's going to go down is where the white people don't have their money.
Yeah, then that's
because,
true.
I mean, you can look at this with historical institutions, period. Look at, with Morris Brown College or any of the other schools that were struggling with financial aid and stuff. And I'm like, that would never happen at Georgia State, period, ever. I never had to worry about any of that there. You know why? Because it's tons of white people there. It's tons of Asians there. Like, they are not about to put that in the situation where that fails. So
that's even if with a bigger bank, not to interrupt you, but I told someone once, like when I hear people have the conversations of I'm working on my credit, I gotta have this highest credit score. And then I don't say nothing, but I'm like, I've got a lot of things with a lower credit score that I probably wouldn't share because they think I would be lying. But you can have a bank located in a mostly Black area, and it could be a bigger bank. It could be SunTrust or Bank of America. They would deny you before you can finish signing your name. You drive up to Alpharetta and you get approved. Or it depends on where you live. You give your address and they're like, well, you live here and we know what the median income is. Even though your credit sucks, we'll give it to you. Because like you said, they have other white people they have to back or Asians. And so they trust you. So again, you have to figure out how do you want to support the banks. I support them by having a checking account. My money is stored there. But I'm not going to ask them to do anything else. They don't have the capacity to help. Art of war.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. I think we've hit on about everything. I was going to, because they start talking about strange fruit at the end, which made me go back and listen to Nina Simone's Strange Fruit. I assume people know it, but then I come across a lot of people who don't. So if you have never heard Strange Fruit, Google it and listen to it. Yeah, that's it. Cause yeah, I plan on going through like all the court cases and everything too. But like I said, I think I had too much. I'm sorry. Yeah, I get excited. I don't get to discuss books anymore. I was an English teacher for 6 years. So I really enjoy talking about books and structure and content and all that other fun stuff. So
yeah. I mean, I was like, I was telling my boyfriend about what we were reading next, and he was like, look, after this one, y'all need to find something uplifting.
We do.
Hey, tell your boyfriend. I said, yo, that's what's up.
Maybe we just find something about a Black author to support that has some positive messages to it.
I was like, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. It could even be a novel,
Yeah, I think that'd be cool.
Yeah.